Hello there and welcome back to some more Forza Horizon 4. Today we are taking a look at the DLC cars for week number 19 of the car pass, aka the 31st of January 2019. As usual, we got two cars dropping this week, and the theme of this week was ancient economy cars. Now, while these two cars seem pretty similar when you look at them statistically and look at the styling and so on and so forth, when you actually dig a little bit deeper, these cars are actually pretty darn interesting and very different from each other indeed. We begin with the 1966 Hillman Imp, 55 horsepower, 56 foot-pound torque, 1,647 pounds of weight, rear-engined rear-wheel drive, D-Class, 100 PI. The little Hillman Imp, of course, another British car in this British game, always a good thing to see. The Hillman Imp was essentially Hillman's take, or I can't quite remember the name of the company that owned Hillman. They had a weird name, but anyways, this is their take on the Mini, their take on an economy car, and the way they went around doing it is a little bit on the strange side, to say the least. First thing that you might notice about this car is it's rear-engined. Now, this wasn't entirely uncommon at the time. You know, you had the Fiat 500, Volkswagen Beetle, but when you consider, you know, this market had the Morris Minor and the Mini, and a lot of cars in this market that were starting to come out were going front-engined, it's weird Hillman decided to stick the engine in the rear. What's even weirder is this engine is actually all aluminium. It is a full-on aluminium engine, which was practically unheard of back then. The first ever mass production car with an all aluminium engine. On top of that, it had a trailing arm rear suspension, which is weird for these sort of cars. Yeah, very sophisticated sort of car for its era. And as a result of that, of course, and the fact that it's British, while it was very ambitious and very, very advanced for its era, the issue with that is, of course, it wasn't particularly reliable. And despite the Imp being cheap and actually pretty darn good to drive, and having numerous successes in rallying and touring car, the Imp just never really sold. Eventually Hillman would go on to be acquired by Chrysler, who would turn it into Chrysler Europe, and they sold this thing for a couple of years afterwards with a couple of revisions. But the Hillman Imp sort of never really gained the sales success. It was the cheapest car in England at one point, but it was often surpassed by stuff like your Minis and stuff, which were more popular, more conventional, more reliable. That being said, though, the Hillman Imp is still a pretty cool car. I really like this thing. It has some unique modifications to it. It does actually have a wide body for it, interestingly enough. Not too much a fan of that one. But it does have some Lucas rally lights, which are the coolest rally lights in this entire game. They look fantastic. Has a little police light on it as well. And it is huge fun to drive. I'm seriously looking forward to building one of these up and sticking about 120 horsepower in it and just letting it fly. Because it's rear-engined, the rear end likes to kick out a little bit. It's a fun car to just chuck around and drive. And around a short course, I don't think you'll find anything as fun as this, and it should be quick as well. Again, rallying, touring car pedigree, this was one of the most successful touring cars of all time, and rallying it did very well in as well. Yeah, the Hillman Imp is a proper cool little car, and it is an excellent addition to the game in my opinion. Next up, we have the 1963 Opel Kadett A, 46 horsepower, 54 foot-pound torque, 1,543 pounds of weight, front-engined rear-wheel drive, D-Class, 100 PI. While the Imp, of course, was designed to be very advanced and different and had all these different ideas, the Kadett was more designed to be, well, the anti-Volkswagen is essentially the term they came up with when they were designing this. It was designed to be simple, it was designed to work, because it's German, and of course that's the way the Germans work, and, well, compared to the Imp, yes, it did what it set out to do. It's known for being fantastically reliable engine-wise. Bodywork does like to corrode, but skip over that. Yeah, interesting fact about this car, the engine only weighs 96 kilos, which is very, very light for an engine. Yeah, it is an interesting car. Of course, many people will know the Kadett from Top Gear, where, of course, it was nicknamed Oliver by Richard Hammond, who had one, and I believe he still has it to this day. Of course, bought it over from Botswana. The Kadett, of course, well, historically is a more important car than the Imp. While the Imp sort of fizzled out, never really did much, the Kadett would eventually go on to be renamed the Astra, and of course, as we know today, the Astra is sold gazillions of cars and so on and so forth. Interestingly enough, despite being called the Kadett A, this isn't actually the first generation of the Kadett, it's the first generation of the modern day Kadett, but the Kadett was actually a car back in the 30s, ended production in the 1940s during the war, but yeah, this is sort of the first return of the Kadett since the war, since Germany had, well, the issues they had during the war. Between the two, I think the Imp is actually quicker stock. It certainly has more power. But yeah, the Kadett, not so much an interesting car. There's not really a whole lot of interesting things you can do with this car particularly. I know a lot of people will like it from Top Gear fame, but in my opinion, the Imp is the cooler car of the two. While the Kadett is the one that sold the most, looking back on it from a historical standpoint, the Imp for me is the car which brightens my heart a little bit more, and I really, really like the Imp. The Kadett, you know, it's a cool car to see in the game again, sort of Top Gear. As far as all that's concerned, it's nice to see it. It is nice to have the proper Kadett instead of that 1979 Kadett, which I quite liked, but I know a lot of people would prefer, you know, the Top Gear Kadett because it is the Top Gear Kadett. But the Imp, I really am smitten with this car. It's probably one of my favourite cars that has come in the car pass, just because it's such a cool little car to drive around in. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did, and the Kadett is a nice thing to have as a piece of Top Gear memorabilia. So there you go, a pretty strong week for the car pass in my opinion. I really like sort of the weirder side of these cars. I really like these weird economy cars that you can build up and do all sorts of things with, and these cars satisfy that pretty greatly. Again, I can't help but recommend the Imp. Try the Imp. The Imp is hilarious amounts of fun. The Kadett, you know, might be a bit more up your alley if you like sort of more conventional cars, if you want to compare it to, say, an Escort, or, you know, hell, compare it to the Beetle. It's certainly there. It's the more conventional of the two. It's the car that caught on a little bit more. But the Imp is the car which has stolen my heart. So, yeah, definitely go try the Imp. And a strong week for the car pass in general. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching. Join me next time when we're going to take a look at next week's car pass offerings, which is, of course, the final week of this particular month for car pass. And I think there's only one more week after that, because the car pass only promised 21 weeks. And next week will be week 20. So, yeah, interesting times, but nevertheless, thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, a farewell.